Has anyone ever been hurt by another person? Yeah. I think we all have, if we're being honest. Hurt big ways, but small ways. What to do with that? Let me tell you a story. Story of two friends traveling in the desert. They get into an argument, and the one friend slaps the other friend across the face. That person doesn't say anything in response, but kneels down and writes in the sand, "Today, my best friend hurt me." They move on. They find an oasis, and there's a small water hole. The friend who got slapped in the face jumps in first to drink and to bathe. But he gets stuck in the mire and begins to sink. And the friend that slapped him in the face pulls him out. Again, the man says nothing, but then finds an object and starts carving in a stone. "Today, my best friend saved my life." The moral of the story is this: when others hurt us, we are to write them, if you will, in sand, so the wind can eventually erase the memory of them. But when others do us good, we are to write them, if you will, as in stone, so that we always remember them. And I think that this is a good story that offers us a new perspective on a very old parable. In Matthew's Gospel, chapter 18, Jesus tells a story, and he begins it by saying, the kingdom of heaven is like this: a servant and a master. The servant owes the master a huge amount. Now that's what we get in English, but from the it's 10,000 talents. But because we don't know what a talent is anymore, a huge amount. But a talent in Roman times, a talent was 15 years worth of wages. So multiply that by 10,000, it's 150,000 years worth of debt that he owed his master. Meaning an absurd amount that he could never pay back in thousands of lifetimes. And the master is willing to forgive him of the entire debt out of mercy for his servant. But then the servant, of course, turns around and with a fellow servant who owes him a far less couple weeks worth of wages, demands repayment right then and there. The master hears about this and says, here's the consequences. You weren't willing to forgive another person, your equal, far less amount than I was, your superior, your master. You could never have paid. And so you're going to prison until you pay back everything you owe me, which of course is impossible. So the man is going to die in prison. And Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like this. It won't be a prison, it'll be a pit. And we'll never be able to pay back the debt we owe him due to our sins. And so we will have an eternal death because we weren't willing to do for others on far lesser amounts than we did to him. And he forgave us. And I point to the crucifix because I think today's gospel passage and also the parable, the story, lends us a new appreciation into the crucifix. It's interesting. In every Catholic church that you will ever visit around the world and up and down the centuries, we have always had a crucifix. Now, in the churches of our brothers and sisters and other Christian denominations, it's a cross. And thanks be to God, they have a cross in their churches. But what was a cross in Jesus' time? First of all, it's a shape. And secondly, it was an instrument of punishment. An instrument of punishment. The Romans used it to punish people, their enemies and people who have transgressed them, offended them, who have committed grave crimes. But put Jesus upon the cross, the Son of God upon the cross, with that background in mind, and the reason why we put a crucifix, meaning Christ upon a cross in every one of our churches, is because we are to remember two things. We're to remember that He is taking the debt of our sins, that we could never pay back. And He is experiencing the reality of our sins, which is death. And what we're supposed to do, and the reason why it's, if you will, etched into the architecture of every Catholic church, as if in stone, is to forever remember this is also a sign of His love and His mercy. He sees that none of us can pay back the wages of sin. Even if we lived 1,000 times and spent 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years doing penances, acts of saying, Lord, I'm sorry for my sins, we could never pay back to Him the wages of sin, which is eternal death. And by the way, not just mortal sins, but just one venial sins, let alone the fact that we sin every day. Even if we never committed a mortal sin, without Him, we could never get into heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like this, Jesus says. He's laying it out plain for us to see. But what He says in today's teaching is that if I do this for you, and none of us are deserving of this because He's God and we're merely human, billions and billions of us across the ages, but He does it for you as an individual. If I do this for you, if I take your punishment and I take the consequences of your punishment, if I pay the wages of your sin, if I die for you, so that you might not die eternally separate from me, which is hell, then when others offend you, what will you do with it? Will you write it in stone and forever hold it against them? Or will you write it in sand?